For Eleanor, my dear wife, I leave the sum of $50. The words of the lawyer, Mr. Davies, echoed in the conference room like a slap in the face. My two sons, Arthur and Leo, exchanged shocked glances that quickly morphed into mocking smirks. Claire, Arthur's wife, was the first to let out a sharp laugh that cut through the air like a knife. $50? Arthur asked, unable to contain his own laughter. Dad had a sense of humor right to the end. Leo joined in the laughter, shaking his head as I remained seated in that leather chair, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet. 45 years of marriage, 45 years of absolute dedication, and my husband had left me what would barely cover a week's worth of groceries. Well, at least you can buy yourself something nice at the farmer's market, Eleanor, Claire said with that venomous smile she had perfected over the last few years. The room filled with whispers and muffled giggles. Even the lawyer himself seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but he continued reading as if nothing had happened. For Arthur, my older son, he left the family home and 60% of the company's shares. Arthur sat up straighter in his chair, his smile now wider. Claire squeezed his hand in satisfaction, as if she had just won the lottery. For Leo, my younger son, he left the remaining 40% of the company and all the rental properties. I just sat there, my wrinkled hands clutching the black handbag I had bought for my husband's funeral just a week before. $50. After a lifetime of sacrificing for this family, after giving up my own dreams to build theirs, after caring for my husband through his long illness, that was all I was worth to him. Well, Mom, Arthur said with a condescending smile, at least you won't have to worry about the upkeep on the house. Claire and I will take care of everything. The words sounded like a prison sentence. My own home, where I had raised my children, where I had cooked thousands of dinners, where I had cried and laughed for decades, was no longer mine. But let me tell you how I got to this moment of humiliation, because this story began very differently. Just 2 years ago, I was Eleanor, a 69-year-old woman who believed she had a close-knit family and a solid marriage. I lived in a beautiful house in a quiet Chicago suburb, surrounded by a garden full of red roses that I tended to every morning as if they were my own daughters. My daily routine was simple, but it filled me with satisfaction. I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, brew strong coffee just the way my husband liked it, and while he read the day's newspapers, I would organize the household activities. Sundays were sacred for our family. Arthur would arrive with Claire, Leo with his eternal good humor, and I would prepare a feast that lasted for hours. The Sunday pot roast was my absolute specialty. I would marinate the meat starting Saturday night, with a secret recipe I had inherited from my mother. Everyone said I had the perfect touch, that nobody cooked like me. Mom, your hands are magic, Leo would tell me as he stole little pieces of meat straight from the roasting pan. Those were the moments that made me feel whole, necessary, loved. Arthur had always been my more serious son, the one who inherited his father's meticulous temperament. From the age of 20, he worked in the family import business, and I swelled with pride watching him grow professionally. When he met Claire at a business conference, I thought fate had sent him the perfect woman. She was elegant, educated, had a successful career in marketing, and seemed genuinely interested in being part of our family. The first few months with Claire were like a dream. She would arrive at family gatherings with fresh flowers or cakes from the best high-end bakery downtown. She helped me in the kitchen, praised my recipes with enthusiasm, and even asked me to teach her how to make my famous homemade apple pie. Eleanor, you cook like an angel from heaven, she would say as I showed her the exact point to stir the filling. I finally had the daughter I had always dreamed of having. Leo, my younger son, was like the sunshine in our family. Cheerful, spontaneous, he always had a funny story to tell about his job as an engineer at a construction firm. He dreamed of having his own firm one day, and I knew he would achieve it because he had the determination and charisma to succeed at anything he set his mind to. On weekends, Leo would accompany me to the farmer's market. He carried all my bags without me asking, charmed the vendors into giving me the best prices, and we always ended our outing by getting vanilla ice cream at the old-fashioned ice cream parlor I used to take him to as a child. Mom, as long as you're here, I'll be your personal chauffeur, he'd say while driving my old car with a smile. Life felt perfect in those days. My husband successfully ran his company, which he had built from scratch over 30 years of tireless work. The boys had their professional paths well defined and seemed happy with their choices. I was the center that held the entire family together, the one who organized every celebration, every gathering, every special moment that created memories for all of us. Every birthday, every holiday, every professional achievement was celebrated in my house, with my food, with my meticulous organization. I was the one who remembered the important dates, who bought the perfect gifts, who decorated every corner to create the ideal atmosphere. My house was the beating heart of our family, and I felt proud to be the guardian of the traditions we had built over decades. But perfect things have a treacherous habit of changing without warning, and the change came disguised as help and good intentions. It all started so subtly that at first, I didn't realize what was happening. Claire began to arrive earlier on Sundays, ringing the doorbell when I had barely finished getting dressed. "Came to help you, Eleanor dear," she would say with that radiant smile that had started to seem too perfect. "I don't want you to get tired preparing everything alone." At first, I was flattered by her concern. I finally had a daughter-in-law who valued my efforts and wanted to participate actively in family traditions. But slowly, that help began to transform into something completely different. Instead of assisting me, Claire started reorganizing my kitchen according to her own criteria. "Don't you think it would be more efficient to have the spices organized alphabetically?" she would ask, while moving my jars around, breaking the system I had perfected over years. "And these knives would be better in this drawer, closer to the cutting board." My utensils, which I knew with my eyes closed, began to appear in unexpected places. Then came the suggestions about ingredients. "Don't you think it would be healthier to use olive oil instead of butter?" she'd ask in that sweet voice that had started to sound condescending. "I read in a nutrition magazine that saturated fats are very dangerous for people our age." Our age. She was 32, I had just turned 70. But Arthur nodded fervently at every word that came out of her mouth, as if she were a prophet of modern cuisine. "Claire's right, Mom," my older son would tell me with a paternal smile that made me feel like a scolded child. "We should take better care of our health." She studied nutrition in college. That was a lie. Claire had studied marketing, but apparently she was now an expert on everything concerning my home. The criticism quickly spread to other aspects of my house. "This decor has so much potential," she'd comment while examining my furniture, with an expression of professional pity. "With a few modern changes, this place would look absolutely spectacular. Don't you think these colors are a bit outdated?" My burgundy curtains, which I had carefully chosen 10 years ago, had suddenly become embarrassingly out of fashion. My husband, who for 40 years had defended every one of my domestic decisions, began to listen to Claire's suggestions with growing interest. "The girl has very good taste," he would tell me when I protested in private. "It wouldn't hurt to update the house a bit. We've had the same things for years. We've spent years building a home." I wanted to scream, but the words got stuck in my throat. The Sunday family gatherings began to transform dramatically. Instead of being meetings where I was the natural hostess, they became sessions where Claire presented new ideas to improve absolutely everything I did. Arthur supported her unconditionally in every suggestion, nodding like a devoted disciple. Leo, who had always hated family conflicts, simply nodded to keep the peace. But I could see the discomfort in his eyes. One particularly painful Sunday, Claire arrived wearing an elegant green dress that made her look like a magazine model. Her attitude was completely different that day, more confident, more authoritative. Without asking my permission, she went directly to the head of the dining room table, the place that had been mine for decades, and began serving the food as if she were the absolute owner of the house. "Let me do it, Eleanor," she said when I tried to get up to fulfill my usual role. "You've already worked more than enough today." But there was something in her tone of voice that made my skin crawl. It wasn't respect or gratitude. It was a toxic mix of pity and superiority that made me feel like a useless old woman in my own home. "Claire's right," Arthur intervened immediately, as if he had been waiting for that moment. "Mom, it's time for you to relax a bit. We can take care of these things." The word we echoed in my ears like an alarm bell. Since when were Claire and Arthur we in my house? That night, I had the first serious argument with my husband in over 20 years. "Claire just wants to help you," he told me as he undressed with tired movements. "I don't understand why it bothers you so much that someone wants to make your life easier." but I understood perfectly what was happening. I could feel with every fiber of my being that my place in the family was beginning to crumble, and I could do absolutely nothing to stop the avalanche. "It's not help," I explained in a trembling voice. "It's an invasion. She's taking control of my kitchen, my table, my traditions, and you're letting her do it." My husband looked at me with that expression of forced patience he reserved for when he considered me to be irrational. "You're exaggerating, Eleanor," he said with a sigh. "Claire is part of the family now. It's natural that she wants to participate. But participating and taking over are two completely different things." And I knew he refused to see the distinction because it was more convenient for him to ignore the problem. The following weeks were like watching my own life in slow motion while someone else took control of the script. Claire began to arrive not just on Sundays, but also during the week, always with some perfectly reasonable excuse. "I was just passing by after work and thought I'd say hello," she would say. But then she would stay until very late reorganizing something or suggesting changes. Arthur started visiting more often too, but he no longer came to see me. He came to discuss plans with Claire, to look at furniture catalogs, to measure spaces for potential renovations. I had become a phantom in my own home, present but invisible, needed but ignored. The transformation of my home was so gradual that at first I thought maybe I was imagining things. But when I woke up one morning and found Claire reorganizing my pantry without even asking my permission, I knew she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. "Good morning, Eleanor." She greeted me with that smile I had learned to fear. "I was noticing you have a lot of expired things in here." I decided to do a deep clean. My homemade preserves, which I had prepared with so much love during the fall, were piled in a garbage bag. "These jams are over 6 months old," she explained as if she were a health inspector. "It's dangerous to consume such old food at our age." Our age. That phrase again that made me feel as if we were contemporaries, as if she had the right to make decisions about my health and my house. "Those jams are perfectly fine," I protested weakly, but my voice sounded pathetic even to myself. "I made them following my grandmother's recipe, with the exact amount of sugar to preserve them for years." Claire looked at me with that exaggeratedly patient expression used with small children or confused elderly people. "Eleanor, dear, times have changed. We know so much more about food safety now," she explained as she continued to throw my things away. "Arthur asked me to look after your health because he's very worried about you." The lie rolled off her lips so naturally that for a moment I doubted my own perception of reality. Arthur had never told me he was worried about my health. In fact, for weeks we had barely spoken beyond superficial greetings when he came home. But when he arrived that afternoon and saw the reorganized pantry, he smiled at Claire as if she had performed a miracle. "This is amazing, honey. Mom needed someone to help her with these things." "I didn't need help," I muttered, but no one heard me. I had ceased to exist as a valid voice in family conversations. I had become the topic of conversation, not a participant. They spoke about me in my presence as if I were a piece of furniture that required occasional maintenance. Dinners became exercises in silent humiliation. Claire had completely taken over my kitchen, preparing meals she considered more appropriate for the family's age. My traditional dishes, perfected over decades, were replaced by bland salads and unseasoned steamed fish. "Salt is very bad for blood pressure," she would explain while serving tiny portions that left everyone hungry. My husband, who had always praised my cooking with genuine enthusiasm, now ate in silence and then told Claire how refreshing it was to try healthier food. Leo tried to maintain normal conversations, but even he seemed uncomfortable with the new family dynamic. His visits became shorter and less frequent. "You don't like coming home anymore?" I asked him one day as he said goodbye after barely an hour. My younger son looked at me with sad eyes that broke my heart. "Mom, it's just, everything is so different now. Claire is very intense." It was the first time someone in the family had admitted that something was wrong, but even Leo seemed resigned to accepting the new reality. The weekends, which were once my sacred refuge, became my weekly nightmare. Claire would arrive on Saturday morning with detailed plans to improve some aspect of the house. Arthur would accompany her, carrying boxes of new decorations or paint samples she had chosen without consulting me. "Surprise, Eleanor," she would announce. We're redoing the living room this weekend. My furniture, which had history and memories associated with it, was labeled as outdated and depressing. The sofa where I had nursed my sons, where my husband would fall asleep watching television, where we had shared thousands of intimate conversations, was replaced by a modern beige set that looked like it belonged in a doctor's waiting room. Doesn't it feel younger with these changes? Claire would ask me while admiring her work, but I just felt like a stranger in my own home. Every familiar object that disappeared took with it a piece of my identity, my history, the woman I had been for 70 years. The family photos were reorganized too. The pictures of my wedding, of my son's first steps, of family vacations that had been proudly displayed for decades, were relegated to boxes or replaced by professional photographs of Arthur and Claire. Old photos make the house look sad, my daughter-in-law explained. It's better to have more current and cheerful images. My husband observed these changes with growing approval. The house looks more modern, he would comment. Claire has a very good eye for decorating. I wanted to scream at him that it wasn't about decoration, but about erasing our family history, but the words were stuck in my throat like stones. The nights became especially lonely. My husband would fall asleep early, exhausted from work, and apparently satisfied with the new version of our home. I would walk through the house like a ghost, recognizing less and less each day. The familiar sounds had changed too. Instead of the comforting tick-tock of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my mother, there was now the beep of a digital clock Claire had installed, because it was more accurate. The smells of my home had also disappeared. It no longer smelled of my favorite spices, of fresh-cut flowers from my garden each morning, of the scented candles I lit in the afternoons. Now everything smelled of industrial cleaning products and artificial air fresheners that Claire considered more hygienic. During meals, conversations revolved exclusively around Claire's plans for the next home improvement. Arthur participated enthusiastically, suggesting additional modifications and praising his wife's every idea. I sat in silence, chewing food that had no flavor, at a table I no longer recognized as mine, surrounded by people who claimed to love me but had decided I was no longer capable of making decisions about my own life. "What do you think, Eleanor?" Claire would ask me occasionally, but it was obvious my opinion was irrelevant. If I expressed any reservation or a different suggestion, Arthur would immediately intervene to explain why Claire's idea was superior. "Mom, you have to trust us. We know what's best for you." One March afternoon, while I was sitting in my garden trying to find a moment of peace among the roses that still belonged to me, the phone rang. It was Helen, a former colleague from my days as a secretary in an accounting office more than 20 years ago. Her voice sounded excited and full of energy, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere that had invaded my home. "Eleanor, dear, I have an incredible proposal for you," she said without preamble. "Do you remember Mrs. Beatrice, the one who lived in the building where I worked? Her daughter lives in Florida now and is looking for someone trustworthy to look after her mother. The job includes housing, an excellent salary, and Beatrice is a lovely woman. I immediately thought of you. For a moment, it felt as if someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed for months. The possibility of leaving my own house, of finding a purpose again, of being needed and valued by someone, filled me with a hope I had forgotten existed. "In Florida?" I asked, feeling my heart beat faster. "For how long?" "At least a year, maybe more if things work out," Helen explained. "Beatrice is 85 years old, but she's very sharp. She just needs companionship and someone to help with basic tasks. Her daughter said she prefers a mature woman with life experience. The salary is $1,000 a month, plus all expenses paid. Eleanor, it's a perfect opportunity for you. $1,000 a month." It was more money than I had personally handled in decades. My husband had always controlled the family finances, giving me a weekly amount for household expenses. The idea of having my own money, of making my own decisions, was as strange as it was exciting. "I don't know, Helen," I said, although every fiber of my being screamed to say yes. I'd have to talk it over with my family. I can't just leave and leave my husband alone. But even as I spoke those words, I wondered if anyone would really notice my absence. Hadn't Claire proven to be perfectly capable of managing all aspects of my home? "Think about it carefully, dear," Helen said before hanging up. The opportunity won't last forever. Beatrice needs an answer by the end of the week. When I hung up the phone, I sat in the garden for hours, imagining what it would be like to live in a different state, to care for someone who truly needed my services, to have meaningful conversations with a person who valued my experience instead of considering it obsolete. That evening, during dinner, I gathered the courage to mention Helen's call. A friend offered me a job in Florida, I said casually as Claire served her usual bland fish, taking care of an elderly lady. The salary is very good and includes housing. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Arthur was the first to react, letting out a dry laugh that chilled my blood. A job? Mom, you're 70 years old. You're past the age of working. His tone was the same he would use to scold a child who had said something ridiculous. Besides, your place is here, with the family. It's just an idea, I murmured, feeling immediately foolish for having brought it up. But something inside me refused to give up completely. It could be an interesting experience. I haven't traveled anywhere in years. Claire exchanged a meaningful look with Arthur before speaking. Eleanor, I don't want to be rude, but do you really think you're equipped to take care of another person? You've been very forgetful lately. Wouldn't it be more sensible for you to stay here where we can look after you? The word forgetful hit me like a slap. I wasn't forgetful. I was being systematically marginalized from my own life. Your mother isn't forgetful, my husband intervened, and for a moment I thought he was going to defend me. But Claire is right. It makes no sense for you to go to another state at your age. Here you are safe and well cared for. Well cared for, as if I were a pet or a plant that needed occasional watering. Besides, Arthur continued, what would Dad do without you? He can't stay alone in this house. It was ironic that they were now worried about my husband's ability to care for himself when for months they had acted as if I were completely dispensable to the functioning of the home. We could hire someone to come during the day, I suggested weakly. Oh, Claire could. But Claire interrupted me before I could finish the sentence. Oh, Eleanor, I have my job and my own responsibilities. I can't be here 24/7, taking care of two elderly people. Two elderly people. As if Arthur and Leo were helpless orphans instead of grown men perfectly capable of looking after their father. Leo, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. Mom, if you really want to travel, we could plan a family vacation. But going alone to another state, I don't think it's a good idea. Even my younger son, who had always been my ally, was now joining the chorus of voices, treating me like a senile old woman, incapable of making rational decisions. It was just an idea, I repeated, feeling the last spark of hope I had felt in months fade away. It's not important. But I knew I was lying. It was very important. It was the difference between continuing to slowly disappear in my own home or reclaiming some of my lost identity. The following days were especially difficult. Every time I thought about the opportunity I had rejected, I felt a mixture of regret and resentment that ate away at me. Helen called me on Friday to tell me that Beatrice had found someone else, a 60-year-old woman from Guatemala who had accepted immediately. She was perfect for you, Eleanor, she told me, with sadness in her voice. I hope another opportunity comes up soon. But I knew there wouldn't be another opportunity. My family had made it very clear that my role was to stay at home, invisible and silent, while they decided what was best for my life. The idea of rebelling, of making an independent decision, seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. Claire, apparently feeling she had won an important victory, intensified her efforts to completely remodel my domestic identity. Now that we know you're staying with us forever, she told me with that fake smile, we can make long-term plans for your comfort. Her comfort meant more changes, more loss of control, more erasure of the woman I had been. That night, lying next to my peacefully snoring husband, I wondered when I had stopped being Eleanor, the woman with her own dreams and opinions, and become mom, mother-in-law, the missus, a series of roles defined by my relationship to other people. When had I accepted that my value as a human being depended exclusively on my utility to others? And most painfully of all, why had I let it happen? The moment that would change everything forever came 3 weeks later, on an April afternoon that began like any other. My husband had taken a turn for the worse with what seemed like a bad flu he'd had for several days. and the doctor had suggested we take him to the hospital for more detailed tests. The appointment was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had spent the morning preparing everything he needed. His medications, the health insurance documents, a change of clothes in case they decided to admit him. "Arthur will pick us up at 1:30, I told my husband as he rested in bed. For the past few weeks, I had delegated these responsibilities to our older son, who had insisted that he would handle all medical matters because hospitals can be confusing for older people. I had accepted this new dynamic with the resignation that had characterized all my recent months. At 1:15, my husband was already dressed and sitting in the living room waiting. I had his bag packed and had called Arthur twice to confirm he was on his way. "I'm leaving the office now, Mom," he had said on the second call. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, max." Claire had promised to meet us directly at the hospital after finishing an important meeting at her job. 1:30 came and went with no sign of Arthur. My husband began to show signs of impatience, coughing more frequently and asking what time it was every few minutes. At 1:45, I called Arthur again. The phone rang several times before he answered with a rushed voice. "Mom, an emergency came up at the office. A very important client arrived without an appointment. I can't leave now." "But Dad's appointment is at 2, I reminded him, feeling a pang of panic in my stomach. The doctor was very clear about the importance of not missing it. My husband looked at me from the sofa with a worried expression, clearly hearing my side of the conversation. I know, Arthur said impatiently. "But this client could mean the biggest contract of the year for the company. I can't let him walk. Claire will meet you at the hospital, okay? She can handle talking to the doctors." And he hung up before I could reply. I immediately called Claire, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times over the next 10 minutes, with the same result. My husband had started to get nervous, insisting that he couldn't miss this appointment because the doctor had been very specific about the urgency of the tests. "We're going in a cab," I finally decided, although the idea terrified me. It had been years since I had handled complicated medical situations alone, and my husband depended completely on me to navigate the complex hospital system. But I had no other choice. I called a cab company, and they said one would arrive in 20 minutes. When we finally got to the hospital, we were already half an hour late. The receptionist informed us that we would have to wait until there was a cancellation because they had given our slot to another patient. My husband looked increasingly weak, and I felt completely lost trying to navigate the forms and procedures Claire had promised to handle. We spent 4 hours in the waiting room. I called Arthur 6 times. All went straight to voicemail. Claire didn't answer her messages either. We were completely alone, 2 elderly people lost in a medical system that seemed designed to confuse and frustrate. When they finally saw my husband, the doctor was clearly annoyed by the delay and had to rush the examination. "He needs to come back tomorrow to complete the tests," the doctor told us with a serious expression. We couldn't do everything necessary today because of the lost time. My husband looked exhausted and confused, repeatedly asking me why Arthur and Claire hadn't come as they had promised. The cab ride home was silent and painful. My husband coughed constantly, and I felt a mixture of anger and despair that was hard to control. When we arrived home at 7 o'clock in the evening, we found Arthur and Claire sitting comfortably in the living room, watching television and eating pizza from a greasy cardboard box. "How did it go at the hospital?" Claire asked in a casual tone, as if she had completely forgotten she was supposed to meet us there. "We hope everything went well." The casualness with which she spoke those words left me speechless for several seconds. "You abandoned us," I finally said, my voice trembling. "You promised to be with us, and you left us alone." Dad had to wait 4 hours, and they couldn't even complete all the tests. Arthur didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, I already explained that an emergency came up," he replied defensively. "And Claire had that super important meeting she couldn't cancel. These things happen. The important thing is that you got to the hospital." As if the fact that we had managed to get there on our own was enough to absolve their abandonment. "The important thing," I repeated slowly, "is that your father needed support, and you weren't there." My voice had become firmer, fueled by hours of accumulated frustration. "You promised to be there, and you lied." It was the first time in months that I had directly confronted Arthur about his behavior. Claire got up from the sofa with an offended expression. Eleanor, I think you're being very dramatic. You are capable adults who can handle a doctor's appointment. You don't need us to hold your hands like little children. Her words were like a slap, especially because I knew she had a point. We had managed the situation alone, albeit with great difficulty. The point isn't whether we can do it alone, I explained, feeling tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. The point is that you promised to help and you didn't. When we needed you most, you decided that other things were more important. My husband remained quiet, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but too tired to intervene. Arthur got up and approached me with that paternalistic expression he had recently adopted. Mom, I understand you're tired, but you can't expect us to drop our professional responsibilities every time you have a doctor's appointment. We have our own lives. Our own lives. As if his sick father and exhausted mother were inconvenient obstacles to their personal plans. That night, lying in bed, listening to my husband's labored breathing, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't a dramatic break, but more like when a rope frays slowly until it finally snaps under the slightest weight. For months I had accepted the gradual marginalization, the decisions made without my consultation, the loss of control over my own home. But the deliberate abandonment at the hospital had been different. It had been cruel. The next day, while Arthur and Claire were at their jobs, I called Helen. Do you think Beatrice still needs someone? I asked, without preamble. The woman from Guatemala they hired already started working. My friend was surprised by the call, but she explained that the Guatemalan woman had had problems with her visa and hadn't been able to travel. In fact, Helen told me, Beatrice asked me yesterday if I knew anyone else. Are you seriously considering the proposal? The question hung in the air like a chance for redemption, like a door opening when I most needed to escape. Yes, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. I am very interested. When can I speak with Beatrice's daughter? For the first time in months, I felt like I was making a decision that was completely mine, without consulting anyone, without asking permission from people who had clearly shown that my well-being was not their priority. The phone conversation with Beatrice's daughter, Susan, was like a ray of light after months of darkness. Her voice was warm and genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, not just as a potential employee. My mother has told me a lot about you, Mrs. Eleanor, she said from her home in Florida. Helen told her about your experience caring for your own family, and that's exactly what Mom needs, someone with real experience, not just certificates. Susan explained that Beatrice lived in a small but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. Mom is very independent for her age, but she needs company and someone to make sure she takes her medications. She also loves to cook, so it would be wonderful if you could share that activity. The idea of cooking again for someone who would appreciate my work excited me in a way I hadn't felt in years. When could you start? Susan asked. We can handle all the paperwork from here. I have contacts who can speed up the process. Susan's efficiency and professionalism contrasted dramatically with the chaotic way my own family handled important responsibilities. In 2 weeks? I replied without hesitation. I need to arrange a few things here, but I'll be ready to travel in 2 weeks. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, for the first time feeling like the master of my own destiny. I hadn't consulted anyone, hadn't asked permission, hadn't waited for approval. I had made a decision that was entirely mine. The next few days were a whirlwind of secret preparations. While Arthur and Claire continued with their normal lives, assuming I would be indefinitely available to be remodeled according to their preferences, I discreetly organized the necessary documents for my new life. I took my passport out of the drawer, where it had been stored for 10 years, updated my medical records, and began to separate my most important belongings. The hardest part was deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Every object in my house had memories associated with it, but I also realized that many of those memories had already been contaminated by the recent months of humiliation. The apron I had worn for years to cook Sunday family dinners now reminded me of Claire's criticisms of my outdated methods. The family photos that had been relegated to boxes seemed like relics of a happier time that no longer existed. I decided to take only the essentials: practical clothes, a few books that had been important to me, the jewelry my mother had left me, and a single photograph of my sons when they were little, before they became the men who now treated me like a burden. Everything else could stay in the house that no longer felt like my home. On Thursday of my second week of preparations, Susan called with excellent news. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Eleanor. Your flight is booked. It leaves on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll pick you up at the airport here." The reality of my escape had materialized with a speed that left me breathless. "Yes, please," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and terror that reminded me of when I was young and my whole life stretched before me full of possibilities. "I'll be there on Saturday." After hanging up, I sat on my bed and cried for the first time in months. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and anticipation. Friday night, I decided it was time to inform my family of my decision. I had considered just leaving without saying anything, but my upbringing and principles prevented me from disappearing without an explanation. During dinner, which consisted of another of Claire's bland creations, I took a deep breath and announced my news. "I'm leaving for Florida tomorrow," I said in a firm voice. "I got the caregiver job I mentioned a few weeks ago. My flight leaves at 10 o'clock in the morning." The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the hum of the digital clock Claire had installed. Arthur was the first to react, letting out that dry laugh I had grown to hate. "Mom, what are you talking about? We already discussed this. You can't just go off to another state alone at your age." His tone was condescending, as if he were scolding a child who had proposed something absurd. "I'm not asking for permission," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "I'm informing you of a decision I've already made. The paperwork is done, the ticket is bought, and the job is confirmed." My husband looked at me with a mixture of shock and confusion, clearly not fully processing what was happening. Claire dropped her fork on her plate with a clatter. "Eleanor, this is ridiculous. You can't just abandon your husband to go take care of a stranger. What will people think?" The concern for social appearances was typical of Claire, who was always obsessed with maintaining a perfect image. "People will think that a 70-year-old woman decided to have purpose and dignity instead of being treated like a piece of furniture in her own house," I replied, feeling a strength in my voice that hadn't been there for months. "And my husband is perfectly capable of taking care of himself, especially with all the help you two have been so eager to provide." My husband finally found his voice. "Eleanor, I don't understand. Why do you want to leave? Aren't you happy here with us?" The question was so naive it broke my heart. How could I explain to him that I hadn't been happy for months, that I had been systematically excluded from all decisions about my own life, that I had become a stranger in my own home? "I haven't been happy for a very long time," I told him gently. "But you've all been too busy reorganizing my life to notice." Leo, who had remained quiet, looked genuinely disturbed by the revelation. "Mom, if you weren't happy, you should have told us," my younger son mumbled. "We could have talked, found a solution." But I knew it was too late for talks. The months of marginalization had been a constant conversation that they had chosen not to hear. Arthur stood up from the table with a furious expression. "This is completely insane. I'm not going to allow my 70-year-old mother to go to a foreign state to work as a domestic servant. It's humiliating for the whole family." The word "allow" rang in my ears like an alarm bell. "You don't need to allow anything," I replied, standing up as well. "I am an adult woman who has made a decision about her own life. For 70 years, I have done what others expected of me. For the first time, I am going to do what I want to do." The force of my conviction seemed to have taken everyone by surprise, including myself. Claire tried one last manipulative argument. "Eleanor, if you leave now, what guarantee do we have that you'll come back? Your husband needs you. We need you." But I was no longer susceptible to the guilt they had used so effectively for months. "If you need me," I said, heading towards my room, "then you should have shown that need by treating me with respect and consideration instead of like an inconvenient burden." I walked up the stairs with more energy than I had felt in years, leaving behind a table full of people who finally understood they could no longer control me. Saturday morning arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed to reflect my state of mind. I woke up at 5, as I had for decades, but this time it wasn't to prepare my husband's breakfast. It was to finish packing my life into 2 suitcases and begin the journey toward my new existence. The house was completely silent. No one had come down to say goodbye or make a last-ditch effort to dissuade me. While waiting for the cab that would take me to the airport, I sat in the living room I no longer recognized as mine and reflected on the previous night. After my announcement at dinner, my husband had gone straight up to the room without another word. Arthur and Claire had stayed in the kitchen, whispering furiously, probably planning strategies to make me change my mind. Leo had knocked on my bedroom door around 10 o'clock, but I had pretended to be asleep. The sound of the cab's horn broke the morning silence. I grabbed my suitcases, took one last look at the house where I had lived for 25 years, and walked out the front door without looking back. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no tears on the threshold, no last-minute pleas. Just the sound of the door closing behind me, marking the end of one stage of my life and the beginning of another, completely unknown. The flight to Florida was my first experience traveling alone in decades. At first, I felt nervous and disoriented, but gradually I began to enjoy the freedom of making my own decisions without consulting anyone. I ordered the breakfast I wanted, chose the magazine that interested me, and for the first time in months, no one suggested a more age-appropriate option for me. Susan was waiting for me at the airport with a sign that said Mrs. Eleanor and a genuinely warm smile. She was a woman in her 40s, professional yet approachable, who immediately made me feel welcome. "It's so good to finally meet you," she said as she carried one of my suitcases. "Mom is so excited to have you. She's been preparing your room all week." The drive from the airport to Beatrice's house was revealing. The city was vibrant and colorful, full of life and energy that contrasted sharply with the oppressive atmosphere I had left behind. Susan pointed out interesting places along the way, explaining about local markets, nearby parks, and activities Beatrice enjoyed. "Mom loves to walk in the Central Park on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she told me. "She says she likes to watch the people and feed the pigeons." Beatrice's house was exactly as Susan had described it, small but comfortable, with a garden full of tropical plants and a porch where you could have coffee in the mornings. Beatrice greeted me at the door with open arms and a smile that lit up her entire wrinkled face. "Eleanor, dear," she exclaimed, "I'm so happy you've come to keep this lonely old woman company." From the very first moment, the difference was astounding. Beatrice treated me like a valued guest, not an employee. She showed me the house with pride, explaining the story behind each photograph and decorative object. "This was my room for 50 years, she said, pointing to the master bedroom. "But now I prefer the smaller room because it gets better morning Sunday. The big room is yours now, with a private bathroom and a view of the garden." My new room was bright and cozy, decorated with soft colors that invited rest. It had a comfortable bed, a desk by the window, and a spacious closet where I could arrange my few belongings. For the first time in months, I had a space that was completely mine, where no one would come in to reorganize my things or suggest improvements. The first few weeks in Florida were like waking from a long, confusing dream. Beatrice turned out to be delightful company, intelligent, funny, and full of fascinating stories about her life. She had been a teacher for 40 years, had traveled all over, and had interesting opinions on everything from politics to gardening. Our conversations during meals were stimulating and respectful, something I had forgotten was possible. The daily routine was simple but satisfying. Beatrice woke up early, like me, and we would have breakfast together on the porch while planning the day. I was in charge of making sure she took her medications, but she was perfectly capable of handling most of her daily activities. We cooked together, explored the neighborhood, and in the afternoons, she would teach me about the plants in her garden while I told her stories from my previous life. "Do you know what I like most about having you here?" Beatrice asked me one afternoon as we were watering the orchids. "You treat me like a whole person, not like a frail old woman who needs constant protection." Her words resonated deeply with me because they described exactly what I had lost in my own home, the basic respect for my complete humanity. During my second month in Florida, I began to notice changes in myself that I hadn't experienced in years. My posture had straightened, my voice had regained its natural strength, and for the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman I saw reflected there. Beatrice had encouraged me to buy new clothes, and together we had chosen colorful dresses that made me feel feminine and vital. It was during this period of personal rediscovery that I met Walter. He was a 73-year-old widower who lived in the same neighborhood and occasionally visited Beatrice, as they had been colleagues during their teaching years. Walter was a true gentleman, polite, kind, and with a sense of humor that made me laugh in ways I had forgotten existed. Walter is interested in you, Beatrice told me with a mischievous smile after one of his visits, and I think the feeling is mutual. The idea of romance at my age seemed both exciting and terrifying. For 45 years, I had been married to the same man, and the possibility of exploring new romantic feelings felt like completely uncharted territory. Walter began to invite me for walks in the park on Sundays. Our walks were slow and peaceful, filled with conversations about books, travel, and dreams we had both set aside during our previous marriages. He treated me with a courtesy and consideration that reminded me how a woman was supposed to feel when she was valued and respected by a man. My late wife used to say that it's never too late to be happy, Walter confided in me during one of our walks. I think she was right. Life doesn't end at 70. Sometimes it just begins again. His words perfectly captured what I was experiencing, not the end of my life, but a new chapter full of possibilities I hadn't considered before. As my new life in Florida blossomed, my phone began to ring with increasing frequency. Arthur called weekly, at first with an angry and demanding tone. "Mom, this joke has gone on long enough. It's time for you to come back home where you belong." But gradually, his calls became more desperate. "Dad misses you a lot. The house isn't the same without you." Leo also called, with a different approach. "Mom, I understand you needed a break, but now that you've had your adventure, don't you think it's time to come back?" His words annoyed me deeply, because they reduced my personal transformation to a simple, temporary adventure. But the most revealing calls came from my husband. His voice sounded lost and confused, as if he had finally realized everything I had been silently managing for years. "Eleanor, I don't understand how things in the house work. Claire comes to help, but it's not the same. The food doesn't taste the same. The house feels empty. Please, come home." During my phone conversations with my family, I had developed a new perspective that allowed me to respond with calm and clarity instead of the guilt and anxiety that had characterized my previous reactions. "I'm not coming back," I told Arthur during one of his more insistent calls. "I've found a life that gives me purpose and respect, and I'm not giving that up to go back to being invisible in my own house." "But Mom," Arthur insisted with that voice he used when he thought he was being reasonable, "here you have a family that needs you. There you just have a stranger who pays you to take care of her." His words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to be valued. Beatrice didn't just pay me to take care of her. She respected me as an equal companion, consulted my opinions, and valued my life experience. "Beatrice is not a stranger," I explained patiently. "She is a friend who treats me with dignity. And you didn't need me when I was there. You just needed me to stay quiet while you reorganized my life according to your preferences." The silence that followed told me that Arthur was finally beginning to understand the gravity of how they had treated me. Claire's calls were particularly revealing. She had adopted a falsely concerned tone that didn't fool anyone. "Eleanor, we know you're going through a crisis, but abandoning your family isn't the solution. Your husband is suffering a lot without you." The irony was astounding. The same woman who had spent months trying to make me invisible was now accusing me of abandonment for seeking my own happiness. My husband suffered for months, watching me be marginalized, and did nothing to defend me. I replied with a firmness that clearly surprised her. "If he is suffering now, maybe he understands how I felt all that time." Claire tried to argue, but I had learned not to engage in debates that only served to drain my energy. The most difficult call came from my husband after 3 months of my departure. His voice sounded broken and aged in a way that broke my heart. "Eleanor, I've been thinking a lot about what you said before you left. I think I didn't realize what was happening. Claire says she was just trying to help, but now I see that maybe we went too far." It was the closest admission to an apology I had heard from any member of my family, but it came too late and was too tentative. "I appreciate you acknowledging that," I told him gently. "But the damage is already done. I have built a new life here, and for the first time in years, I am genuinely happy. I am not giving up that happiness to return to a situation that made me miserable. But we can change things," he insisted desperately. "We can talk to Arthur and Claire, set different boundaries. You can have more control over the house." His promises sounded sincere, but I knew that fundamental changes in personality and attitude don't happen just because someone leaves for a few months. During my 4th month in Florida, I received an unexpected call that would change everything again. It was Mr. Davies, the family lawyer, with news that left me completely speechless. Mrs. Eleanor, I need to speak with you about your husband's will. Some additional documents have appeared during the review of his personal files. Additional documents? I asked, confused. I thought everything had been settled during the reading of the will. Mr. Davies explained that he had found a safe in my husband's office containing papers that significantly modified the testamentary provisions we had heard months ago. Your husband maintained offshore bank accounts that were not included in the original will, the lawyer explained. Apparently, these accounts were specifically intended for you, with very detailed instructions on when and how they should be revealed. My heart began to beat faster as I processed the implications of this information. What kind of accounts? I asked, although a part of me already suspected this revelation would have dramatic consequences for my entire family. Mr. Davies explained that my husband had been systematically transferring money to offshore accounts for the past 15 years, accumulating a considerable fortune that he had kept completely secret. The total amount is approximately $80 million, Mr. Davies said, and I had to sit down because my legs were shaking. The instructions specify that this information was only to be revealed if you were treated disrespectfully during the initial reading of the will. Your husband apparently anticipated that your sons might show their true character if they believed you had inherited very little. The irony of the situation was so perfect it almost seemed too good to be true. My husband, who had remained silent while Arthur and Claire marginalized me, had been secretly preparing a test to evaluate our son's character. The $50 had been a decoy, designed to reveal exactly the kind of people they had become. Do the boys know about this? I asked, although the answer was obvious. Mr. Davies confirmed that Arthur and Leo had no idea about the existence of these additional accounts. According to my husband's instructions, I was the sole beneficiary of this hidden fortune, and I had complete discretion over whether to reveal its existence to the rest of the family. That night, sitting on Beatrice's porch under the tropical stars, I reflected on this extraordinary revelation. My husband, despite his failings during the last months of his life, had shown he knew me better than I had thought. He had predicted that I would need resources to rebuild my life if our sons turned out to be the selfish people they seemed to have become. Beatrice, to whom I told about the lawyer's call, offered me a wise perspective that can only come from someone who has lived 85 years. Eleanor, dear, money is just a tool. The important thing is that you have the freedom to choose how to use it. Your husband gave you a gift far more valuable than money. He gave you proof that you were right about what was happening in your family. The question now was what to do with this information. Could I return home as a rich and powerful woman, able to put Arthur and Claire in their place for good? Or could I continue building my new life in Florida, using the resources to secure my independence and perhaps help others who found themselves in situations similar to mine? Walter, who had been visiting more frequently and whose friendship had deepened into something we both recognized as mature and respectful love, offered me a different perspective. Eleanor, you've shown that you don't need money to be strong and independent. You already did the hardest part. You rescued yourself. Now you have the opportunity to decide what kind of life you want to build with this new freedom. His words captured exactly what I was feeling. The unexpected wealth was less important than the emotional and spiritual wealth I had discovered in Florida. I had learned that I could be self-sufficient, that I could form new relationships based on mutual respect, and that it was never too late to start over. After a week of deep reflection and long conversations with Beatrice and Walter, I made the decision to return briefly to my hometown for the second reading of the will, not because I wanted to go back to my old life, but because I felt I deserved to see the faces of Arthur and Claire when they learned the whole truth. It was a way of coming full circle, of confronting the people who had so cruelly underestimated me. Mr. Davies had arranged the meeting for a Tuesday morning in his office. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing an elegant purple dress I had bought in Florida that made me feel powerful and self-assured. When Arthur and Claire walked into the conference room, their surprised expressions upon seeing me were immediately replaced by fake smiles and condescending comments. "Mom, it's so good you decided to come back," Arthur said with that paternalistic voice I had grown to detest. "We hope you've gotten over your crisis and are ready to come back home where you belong." Claire nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved that her problematic mother-in-law had returned to be managed according to her preferences again. I haven't come back to stay, I clarified immediately. I'm here because the lawyer informed me of additional documents related to my husband's will. Leo, who had arrived a few minutes later, looked genuinely confused by the whole situation. Mr. Davies began the reading with the same professional seriousness that had characterized the first session months ago. Before proceeding with the additional documents, I must explain the context behind the original testamentary provisions. Your husband left specific instructions about when to reveal the complete information about his estate. Complete information? Arthur asked with a mocking smile. Did Dad have more money hidden somewhere? Another $50 for Mom? His laughter was cut short abruptly when Mr. Davies explained the true nature of the inheritance I was about to receive. For the past 15 years, your father maintained offshore bank accounts that have accumulated a total of $80 million, the lawyer announced. These accounts were established exclusively for Mrs. Eleanor, with specific instructions that they only be revealed if she was treated disrespectfully during the initial reading of the will. The silence that followed was so complete and prolonged that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Arthur opened and closed his mouth several times without making a sound. Claire had turned completely pale, her hands trembling visibly on the table. Leo looked at me with an expression of absolute shock mixed with something that looked like genuine shame. 80 million, Arthur finally repeated, his voice barely a whisper. $80 million. Mr. Davies confirmed the figure and proceeded to explain the legal mechanisms that would transfer full control of these accounts to my name within the next 48 hours. Monica was the first to regain her ability to speak, though her voice sounded strangled and desperate. But that's not fair. We are his children. We're the ones who have been taking care of the family business. Why does she get all the money? Her indignation was so perfect, so predictable, it almost made me smile. Why? I said, slowly rising from my chair. My husband knew exactly what kind of people you were. He knew that if you believed I had received only $50, you would show your true character. And you did. Magnificently. My voice was firm and clear, with no trace of the timidity that had characterized my interactions with them for months. Arthur tried to regain control of the situation. Mom, obviously there were misunderstandings. We can fix things. We can divide the money equally among the whole family. The desperation in his voice was palpable, and for the first time in my life, I saw my older son for who he really was, a greedy man willing to say anything to get what he wanted. There is nothing to fix, I replied calmly. For months, you treated me like a nuisance, like a senile old woman who needed to be managed and controlled. You reorganized my house, criticized my food, abandoned me when I needed you most, and laughed when you thought my husband had left me with practically nothing. That behavior revealed who you really are. Leo finally found his voice, and there were genuine tears in his eyes. Mom, I never wanted you to feel that way. I know I stayed quiet when I should have defended you. I know I failed as a son. His repentance seemed sincere, but it came too late to change the damage that had been done. I appreciate your honesty, Leo, I told him gently, but silence in the face of injustice is complicity. You had multiple opportunities to speak up, and you chose the comfort of silence. The words clearly hurt him, but it was important that he understood the consequences of his choices. Claire had started to cry, but her tears seemed more of frustration than genuine remorse. Eleanor, I was always just trying to help you. Everything I did was for your own good, to modernize your life, to make you more comfortable. Claire's capacity for self-deception was truly astounding. What you did, I explained patiently, was invade my home, marginalize my voice, and try to erase my identity to replace it with your version of what a woman my age should be. That wasn't help. It was colonization. Mr. Davies watched the exchange with a professionally neutral expression, but I could see a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Arthur made one last desperate attempt. Mom, we're family. Families get over misunderstandings. We can start over, do things differently. But I had learned that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired simply with words and promises. You had the chance to treat me like family when I was vulnerable and dependent, I replied. You chose to treat me like a burden. Now that I am independent and financially powerful, you want to renegotiate the terms. But relationships don't work that way. After signing all the necessary documents and confirming that the bank transfers were in process, I headed for the door of Mr. Davies's office. Leo followed me into the hallway. "Mom, is there any chance we can rebuild our relationship? Not because of the money, but because I truly understand that I failed you." I stopped and looked him in the eyes, seeing for the first time in months a genuine vulnerability in my younger son. "Leo, forgiveness is possible, but trust is rebuilt with actions, not with words. If you truly want a relationship with me, you will have to prove that you have learned from this experience, and that will take time." I returned to Florida with a sense of closure I hadn't expected to experience. The confrontation had been necessary, not to hurt them, but to definitively close the chapter of my life where I had allowed others to define my worth. Beatrice greeted me with a warm hug, and Walter with fresh flowers from the market. "How do you feel?" Beatrice asked me that night as we drank tea on the porch. "Was it what you expected?" I reflected on her question before answering. The satisfaction had been less than I had anticipated, but the feeling of completed justice was deep and healing. "I feel free," I finally said. "For the first time in my life, I owe no one an explanation for my decisions. I can choose how to spend my time, my energy, and now my money, based solely on what makes me happy and gives me purpose." With my new resources, I decided to establish a foundation to help older women who found themselves in situations similar to the one I had lived through. Beatrice volunteered to help with the organization, and Walter suggested including emotional support programs in addition to financial assistance. A year after my initial escape, Walter and I decided to get married in a small, intimate ceremony in Beatrice's garden. Leo was the only member of my family who came to the wedding. After months of difficult but constructive conversations about rebuilding our relationship, Arthur and Claire were not invited. As I stood next to Walter exchanging vows at 71 years old, I remembered the humiliation I had felt in that lawyer's office just 2 years ago. The woman who had been ridiculed for inheriting $50 no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had learned that true worth isn't measured in inherited money, but in the courage to rebuild your life when everyone expects you to give up. My story began with humiliation at the reading of a will, but it ended with the discovery that it's never too late to write a new chapter for your life.